let's be real. If the Philadelphia Eagles are going to win a Super Bowl on Sunday, Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley, they'll likely be the MVP. But I'm going to tell you who could be a dark horse candidate to win Super Bowl MVP coming up on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louis DiBiase, and I'm joining you on one of our 3 final shows until Super Bowl 59. And this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. As I said, if the Eagles pull this thing off on Sunday, if they stop the three-peat, they stop Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid and Travis Kelce from making history, it's likely because Saquon Barkley and or Jalen Hurts were special and they got it done late in the fourth quarter, or they just asserted their dominance from the jump and they won this football game handily. But you look at the odds of who could win Super Bowl MVP, and for Philadelphia, it's not a coincidence that it's Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts at the top, and of course for the Chiefs, it's Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelce. But I will say, we've seen some crazy Super Bowls where a linebacker wins it, an edge rusher wins it, a wide receiver wins it. If there is an MVP for the Eagles on Sunday that's not named Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley, who could that be? And we had a lot of great interactions on X and on our YouTube community page regarding the subject. So many different names toss around. Of course, DeVonta Smith comes to mind, considering his past success against Kansas City. A.J. Brown, big-time bounce-back performance against the Washington Commanders in the NFC title. Maybe it's A.J. Brown. Dallas Goedert's been their most consistent weapon in the postseason, and the Chiefs are not great against tight ends. Maybe it's Dallas Goedert. For me, again, I can't see a scenario play out where there's an offensive player that's the MVP, not named Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley, because if DeVonta Smith or A.J. Brown or Dallas Goedert have a big game, I think that likely means Jalen Hurts also had a big game, and an MVP trophy normally goes to 90% of the time, it goes to a quarterback. So for me, if it's not Hurts or Saquon, I think it's a player on the Eagles' number 1 defense. And I think it could be Zack Baun. So actually, here's an interesting stat for you. The Philadelphia Eagles are the number 1 ranked defense in football. When a quarterback has faced the number 1 defense in the Super Bowl, their record is actually 3-11 all time. So the number 1 defense going up against a top-tier quarterback in the Super Bowl is 11-3. So I think if the Eagles win this game, and it's not mainly because of Jalen or Saquon, it's because this Eagles defense completely shut down one of the greatest dynasties of all time with Andy Reid, Pat Mahomes, and Travis Kelce. And of the players that could pull this off, I like Zack Baun, because when you think about it, Zack Baun wears so many different hats. Like, he has the potential to make a huge impact. Number 1, he could be covering the Chiefs' best weapon in Travis Kelce. I think there's going to be a lot of moments, and of course Vic Fangio is going to play a zone-heavy scheme in coverage as he always does. There's going to be a lot of times Travis Kelce's over the middle of the field, and guess who's the first guy by him? It's number 53. It's Zack Baun. There will be times he's probably in man coverage against Travis Kelce. Zack Baun is going to be crucial as well in those improv plays where Pat Mahomes escapes pressure. Zack Baun, okay, you're on that second level. It's time. Do you pursue Mahomes, get him down? Do you find Travis Kelce in coverage? Like, he's kind of in that no man's land where you gotta have good judgment. Your eye discipline has to be really good in coverage. Your tackling has to be really good. That's the other thing. The Chiefs are a yak offense. Yards after the catch is where they make their money. It's their bread and butter with Hollywood Brown, with Xavier Worthy, the screen game with Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco, and Kareem Hunt. Zack Baun, the tackling in the open field is so important, and he is the green dot play calling linebacker. He's going to be in on every play. He's going to be all over the field. So I feel like Zack Baun, outside of Hurts and Saquon, might be my 3rd favorite player to potentially win the MVP. And, also, take into account the forced turnovers. Zack Baun is a turnover forced in 2 of 3 playoff games this year. I mean, he has mastered the peanut punch forced fumble. He had an interception against Green Bay. He was the number 1 ranked coverage linebacker, according to Pro Football Focus this year, in coverage. I think it's Zack Baun. I think a lot of our listeners put Nolan Smith in this conversation and Jalen Carter as well, which makes total sense. The last time a defensive player won MVP, it was Von Miller back in 2015. Edge rushers, defensive tackles, sacks, pressures, like that matters a ton. If one of these guys gets a Brandon Graham-like Super Bowl 52 game-winning play in the fourth quarter, especially Jalen Carter, considering the playoff run he's had, I could totally see Jalen winning it. Also, love the mismatch at guard. Kansas City still doesn't know who they're playing at left guard, at left tackle. If you put Jalen Carter on that side, he could eat. And we know Nolan Smith's having one of the best playoff runs an Eagles defensive player has ever had. 4 sacks this year in the playoffs is the most for an Eagle ever. So I could see Nolan, I could see Jalen. Maybe if like Quinyon Mitchell gets 2 interceptions, maybe Quinyon Mitchell could win it. I would cry tears of joy. I mean, what a perfect Cinderella story ending for me if Q gets the MVP. But I do think because of all the hats he wears, because of his impact against Mahomes, against Travis Kelce, tackling in the open field, against the run, I think Zack Baun makes a lot of sense. The last time an inside linebacker, here's some fun trivia. The last time an inside linebacker won Super Bowl MVP was in 2013 for the Seattle Seahawks. Can you remember this name? And no, it was not Bobby Wagner. You can pause it if you want to try to guess. It was Malcolm Smith. That was the last time an inside linebacker won it. It was 12 years ago. So am I predicting this? No, not by any stretch of the imagination. I think Jalen Hurts, if the Eagles win on Sunday, it's going to be because of Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley. Like one of those guys is going to get it. But if they didn't, I like Zack Baun's odds. If I had to place a bet on FanDuel, and maybe I will just for the odds, I think Zack Baun has the best chance. But I agree with a lot of you out there that said Nolan Smith. He's got a good shot. Jalen Carter, those are the other top 2 in my opinion. Maybe Chauncey Gardner-Johnson if he has like 8 tackles, a pick and a forced fumble. Like I could see CGJ getting it. I just don't think there's any way like A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, or Dallas Goedert get it. Because I think Jalen Hurts would get it then. And that's unless it's like Jalen throws for only 170 yards and he has 2 touchdowns. But let's say 110 of those yards go to DeVonta and he also has a touchdown and he has like a big catch in the fourth quarter, like the game-winning play. You know, every year there's that play. And you say, like, that's the play we're all going to remember. The David Tyree catch. Julian Edelman's catch against the Atlanta Falcons, the diving play. Santonio Holmes against Arizona. Like if DeVonta Smith or A.J. Brown or Dallas Goedert make that play, then I could see it. Like that's kind of what happened in 2021 with Cooper Kupp winning Super Bowl MVP. But I really don't think there is a likely scenario where that plays out and Jalen Hurts didn't do enough to, on the ground as well, to win the MVP. Because 90% of the time, the odds are higher that this award's going to go to one of the 2 quarterbacks. But again, gun to my head, my Darkhorse Super Bowl MVP for the Eagles, I'm going to say Zack Baun, the first-team All-Pro linebacker that could potentially win Defensive Player of the Year tomorrow during the NFL award ceremony. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, Jalen Hurts against Steve Spagnuolo. The pressure packages that Spag's going to send to Jalen, those are crucial. What version of Jalen are we going to see in those moments? I'll get into it coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Gametime. Looking for tickets for your next big event? Maybe last-minute tickets to the big game next week in New Orleans? Whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Gametime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals, so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Gametime Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through thousands of options. I recently grabbed a super deal for a prime seat at a comedy show. I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal. Plus, the seat view feature is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat's going to look like. The best part, you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund you 110% of the difference. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so one of the biggest deciding factors in Super Bowl 59, I think, is going to be how Jalen Hurts handles pressure against Steve Spagnuolo's Kansas City Chiefs defense. And Jalen's been a mixed bag, I would say, this year and even, throughout the entirety of his career against the blitz, against different disguised pressure packages, man blitzes versus zone blitzes, just pressure in general, even if it's from just the 4 defensive linemen getting to him. It's been a mixed bag. I think there's a lot of numbers out there you can cherry pick to say he's not a good quarterback against pressure. There's a lot of numbers out there you can cherry pick to say he is good against pressure. Overall, it's hit or miss. It's an inconsistent thing with Jalen. But I will say this year, against the blitz, Hurts' numbers do look good. He had an average 77.5% completion percentage against defenses that blitzed him, 8 passing touchdowns to just 1 interception. So those numbers do look good. I think his efficiency numbers don't look as great, especially against zone blitzes. But if we get this version of Jalen Hurts against Kansas City, they're going to win this football game because Spags kind of lives and dies with pressure. I mean, you saw it. It paid off against Buffalo. That corner blitz with Trent McDuffie on 4th down and the gotta-have-it game on the line drive in the 4th quarter, it was beautiful. And he's going to do that against Jalen. And I think zone blitzes, that's where Jalen in the pocket especially has to make sure he's getting the ball out. He's processing what's happening on the field, pre and post snap, using the middle of the field. The man blitzes, though, are where I feel a lot more confident because, yes, there are times, especially against zone blitzes, where Jalen tends to panic. He drops his eyes. He holds onto the ball for too long, relies a little bit too much on his legs, and he's not looking downfield. But there are other times, especially against man blitzes, where he's super, super decisive. He gets the ball out quick, and he uses his legs to open up the pass. He uses his legs to escape the initial rush, but then he keeps his eyes downfield, and he can carve up pressure. He did it on Sunday in the NFC Championship against the Washington Commanders. And the Chiefs, yes, I think they'll throw some zone blitzes at him, but the Chiefs do play press man coverage more than half the time. So the Chiefs actually line up their outside corners, and this is from Next Gen Stats, 51.5% of the time, their outside corners are playing press man coverage. So if the Chiefs blitz and play man coverage, which is kind of the backbone, the core foundation of what that defense does, I think if Jalen is on his game, and again, we don't know which version of Hurts we're going to get, but if we get the Commanders Jalen and not the Rams Jalen, I think it could be an advantage for the Eagles that the Chiefs have that game plan. Because then what happens with that man coverage ability is if Jalen Hurts escapes the rush, man coverage, their back's going to be turned to Jalen. So he could pick up a lot of rushing yards in that way, but also you're going to get a lot of one-on-one looks for A.J. Brown, for DeVonta Smith, for Dallas Goedert, heck, even a Jahan Dotson, who I think, hey, if his number is called, and it rarely is, but if his number is called, like it was for Quez Watkins in a big spot on a deep ball down the middle of the field in the 4th quarter, unlike Quez Watkins, I think Dotson's going to catch that ball. I think he's going to be much more like Torrey Smith in Super Bowl 52. Torrey Smith, his number wasn't called a lot in the NFC title in the Super Bowl, but when it was, the flea flicker, the helmet catch on 3rd down, he made a couple other big plays in that game. Torrey Smith came through. Quez Watkins did not. I think Dotson can be your Torrey Smith. And they're going to have one-on-one opportunities. I think you could have some explosive plays come from the Eagles beating the Chiefs' pressure on defense. A.J. Brown, he has the highest yards per route run this year against press man coverage. He's literally the best wide receiver in the league going up against what the Chiefs do best. So I'm not guaranteeing that Jalen's going to completely carve up Spags, and I think Spags is going to throw him a lot of simulated pressures, disguised looks. It's going to look like they're coming through the A-gap, and those guys drop back, and here comes the slot corner, maybe vice versa. There's going to be times they're playing zone. There's going to be times they're playing man. There's been times that Jalen's not great in these situations, but there's other times where he's also very good. And if you get that version of Hurts, there's a big-time opportunity, I think, to get explosive plays. And that's so huge because one of the keys to this game is getting out ahead early, is being aggressive early, building up a lead, so then you can pin your ears back and say, we're going to rely on Saquon Barkley and the offensive line the rest of the way. We're going to control time of possession. The best way to beat Pat Mahomes is to keep Pat Mahomes off the field. We're going to try to have 7 to 10 minute drives because we built up a lead. That is so important against Kansas City. And if you're hitting on those explosive plays, if you're winning the time of possession battle, if Jalen Hurts is winning against pressure, if those three keys happen, I don't know if the Chiefs can keep up. Like, the Chiefs are a very, very good football team. Pat Mahomes is a top 2 player of all time. Andy Reid is a top 2 head coach of all time, in my opinion. But if the Chiefs are, if the Eagles are on their A game, if they're winning against pressure, if they're getting explosive plays early in the game, they're not sluggish to start like they were earlier in the year. If they're capitalizing and scoring touchdowns, not field goals, they're not shooting themselves in the foot with self-inflicted mistakes. If they do these things, like, I really think they're going to win this football game. Like, those are such important factors. And it's not just on Jalen. Kellen Moore, he needs to be on his A game like he was against Washington, where he's giving Jalen quick answers against the blitz. That's what I liked, is compared to the Rams and Packers game, the ball was out quickly. They were saying, hey, just get the ball in space to your playmakers and let them do their thing. Heck, maybe you get Saquon Barkley more involved in the receiving game in this game as well. That's something that's kind of been missing lately. Maybe you get him involved in the screen game to try to counter this, although the screen game hasn't been great this year. Maybe you try to dial that back up, or some wheel routes with Saquon on a Nick Bolton in the open field, or a Chanel. I think that's a big-time key. And it's going to be like, that's one of the big-time chess matches I'm really looking for. It can't be like the Rams game where routes are just taking way too long to develop. But Jalen, at the same time, can't panic. Can't let the moment be too big for him. Keep your eyes up, even if you're going to evade pressure with your legs. Try to create with your legs, to create for the pass, to create for your arm. Because I think there can be opportunities with DeVonta Smith, A.J. Brown, and Dallas Goedert against this Chiefs secondary. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I talked about Eagles X Factors yesterday on the show. DeVonta Smith, Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat, the edge rushers. Like, those guys are really underratedly important in this game. I want to talk about now who the Chiefs X Factors are. So we're going to get into that on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game, it's almost here. I can't believe it. We are just 4 days away. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. So here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Pat Mahomes only needs 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board saying DeVonta Smith or Dallas Goedert. Pick your poison. They're going to have more than their receiving yards total. And I'm going to take the over on Jalen Hurts' passing yardage. What I love most, fast, safe withdrawals. When I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Can't believe it. Just 2 more shows until Super Bowl 59. Ryan and Chris of Locked On Chiefs, they're going to join me tomorrow for a Super Bowl special edition of Crossover Thursday. Got a show for you Friday as well. And then the big game is here on Sunday at the Superdome. For the Chiefs, again, the focus is all on stopping Pat Mahomes. It's limiting Travis Kelce. I think Chris Jones, we haven't talked about, is such a good, underrated player. One of the best defensive tackles of all time, and he's just not talked about in the same light, I feel like, as Aaron Donald and maybe even Fletcher Cox to a degree. Like, this is a great player. And that's a good matchup because Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson, who luckily were full participants today in practice on the injury report, looks like they're both ready to go for this matchup. They're going to have their work cut out for them. And same with Mekhi Becton. Like, that Eagles interior against Chris Jones, it's a big matchup to watch. But I wouldn't consider Chris Jones like an X factor. Certainly not Pat Mahomes and Travis Kelce or Andy Reid's play calling. Who are the Chiefs' X factors? There's one guy that I'm looking at closely, and it's Xavier Worthy. Like, I think he's a key X factor to watch. He has been really good in the second half of the season, in the playoffs. He was a key component to that win against the Buffalo Bills. And while the Chiefs don't really utilize his downfield speed yet, they don't push the ball down the field vertically a lot, and the Eagles do have the cornerback speed to match that if they do, I could see Andy Reid using Xavier Worthy in some creative ways where he says, how can I get Worthy over the middle of the field against an Oren Burks or a Zack Baun? Maybe we're going to use him more like pre-snap motion, the screen game, force Philadelphia to tackle him into the open field. It's why tackling is so important in this game. I think that slot battle between Worthy and Cooper DeJean, that's a big-time matchup. And again, with Worthy's speed and run after the catch ability, Cooper said in his press conference today, tackling against Worthy is going to be really important. Ever since Hollywood Brown came back, Worthy has been in this much better role that suits him. Andy Reid's been using him a lot better. He's been playing in the inside a lot. It's going to be rookie versus rookie. Cooper DeJean versus Xavier Worthy. I still feel confident, though, in Coop. I think Cooper DeJean, one thing I was worried about when he was coming out of college is, okay, if he's a slot corner, he has long-range speed, but stiffer hips at times. Can he cover the twitchy slot receiver? Xavier Worthy has that speed, but he doesn't have the quick twitch of a DeVonta Smith as a route runner on the inside. Cooper DeJean has the speed to keep up with. Of course, Worthy might be the fastest player ever. He broke the 40-yard dash record that Chris Johnson set years ago, but Cooper has long-range speed. And Cooper DeJean, he's a Rookie of the Year finalist for a reason. He actually allowed the second fewest yards per target this year when you include the playoffs. Quinyon Mitchell was actually number 3. So Q, Darius Slay, that's the big matchup too, is when Xavier Worthy's on Darius Slay. Darius has the speed, but he's been burned deep more than Quinyon and Cooper this year. When Quinyon, Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay, when they have Xavier Worthy, they have to make sure he's not burning them with the chunk yardage because he's really their only guy this year that's had the ability to create those explosive plays that Philadelphia is like number 1 in the league at. The Chiefs are at the bottom of the league, which is crazy considering they have Pat Mahomes, but the reality is they win by slowly, methodically marching down the field, the screen game, dink and dunk. Nobody has more passing yards that start behind the line of scrimmage since 2018 than Pat Mahomes. So that's kind of what they do, and Xavier Worthy is the one threat that really presents an option to turn a small play into a 20-plus yarder. Hollywood Brown has speed, and he has boosted that passing game a lot, but Worthy is the X factor. DeAndre Hopkins, too, you got to put respect on him still. I mean, he's kind of the Darius Slay of their receiving core, right? He's the veteran to the younger players like a Worthy. He still is good in 50-50 situations in the red zone, but Worthy's the receiver I'm watching the closest that's not named Travis Kelce. And then another guy, I think on defense, Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton has a really big assignment against Philly because, and the Chiefs said it today, like they are not going to be able to stack the box 90% of the time and overcommit to the run game and stop Saquon Barkley. Because I believe, I can't remember which one of their starters it was that said this, but they said that they tried to overcommit to stopping the run in Super Bowl 57 and Jalen Hurts carved them up. If you do that, then boom, here come the one-on-one matchups with A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. So if they can't stack the box, there is going to be situations where Nick Bolton has to cover a lot of range. And he's a rangy linebacker, but he's going to have to be that guy in isolation that's also kind of spying Jalen Hurts. He's going to have to get from sideline to sideline to chase down Saquon Barkley. He might have a tough coverage assignment against Dallas Goedert. He's a player I'm really watching as well. The offensive line needs to get their hands on him when they're pull blocking, like go after Nick Bolton. He's a good, underrated linebacker he's really important for Kansas City's success. So I would say Xavier Worthy, Nick Bolton, like those are two guys that I'm watching closely. But again, the main guys to watch, slow down Travis Kelce in those improv plays on 3rd and 4th down in the red zone. Try to limit Pat Mahomes from killing you, especially in the second half. And then they got to win that matchup on the interior of the offensive line. Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson are banged up, and they're going up against one of the best to ever do it in Chris Jones, and so is Mekhi Becton. So those guys got to have the game of their life, for sure. There's so many things that go into this game. I mean, there's so many different storylines and matchups to watch, keys to victory. We're going to continue to get into it. More Eagles-Chiefs talk for you tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. Ryan Tracy and Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs are going to join me for Crossover Thursday. And then I got a show for you Friday as well. But until then, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Thanks for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.